Welcome to this Advanced HE webinar on setting up your self-assessment team for the Race Equality Charter. It's worth pausing before contacting anyone to set up your team to really think about who you need on your team. The self-assessment team is critical to your self-assessment. You need to work together as a team, and you need to have a real range of skills, knowledge, and roles within that team. And so ensuring you've got the right people in the room for those meetings is really important. So before contacting anyone, and don't panic if you've already contacted people, that's fine as well. But if you haven't yet, just pause and have a think about some of these points. Really remember what you're trying to achieve with your self-assessment. I think often people can underestimate what needs to be done with their Race Equality Charter. Ultimately, we're trying to overcome a huge cultural barrier, and we're trying to break down structures and achieve culture change. And so the job shouldn't be underestimated, and the people you have on your team need to understand the scale of that as well. Ultimately, the self-assessment team is going to try and get the conversation started. And again, don't underestimate the power of that. It's going to take an awful lot of determination and effort just to get people talking sensibly about race equality, and for the self-assessment team to start talking about race equality, and then ultimately for the university to start talking about race equality. Some universities spend 3 years just starting their conversation about race equality, and so you really need to have that in the forefront of your mind. And bear in mind that the people that you need on your self-assessment team to get the actions done might not necessarily understand race equality. And so you're bringing two different types of knowledge into the room together, and they need to learn from each other. Ultimately, you want to have candid, thorough, accurate, and specific identification of the race inequalities within your university. And you need to be able to develop context-specific aims and priorities to achieve race equality. And don't forget to think about those aims and priorities before going on to the next point, which is developing evidence-based actions. You don't want just random actions here, there, and everywhere. The whole point of the application, the self-assessment process, is to get you to a point where you know what you want to achieve over the next 3 years. You're not going to achieve race parity within 3 years. It's going to take longer than that. So what do you want to achieve within the next 3 years? What are your aims and priorities? And then underpinning those aims and priorities, what are your specific actions that are going to help you achieve those aims and priorities? You do need institution-wide senior and middle management commitment and involvement. And I'll specifically say there as well, you need human resources buy-in as well. You need your HR team to be involved so that they can get on board, help you get the data, analyze the data, and also commit to actions on the staff side. You can't change recruitment, selection, promotion, appraisal processes without having buy-in from your HR team. And likewise with section 7 and 8 of the application, you're not going to get buy-in to change teaching and learning without buy-in from your teaching and learning teams. You also need the allocation of adequate resource to make progress and to have impact. And so think in advance about what you might need budget for your self-assessment, and also what budget you're going to have going forward to implement your action plan. Also think about the staff time resource included within this as well. It's not just about money for external things, it's about having people have their time recognised for sitting on that self-assessment team. The team itself needs to work as a team to evaluate and critically analyse equality within the institution. We've had universities say to us that actually they've really benefited from having away days as a self-assessment team, and for having lunches, or the Vice-Chancellor coming and having lunch with the self-assessment team early at the beginning of the process, to validate those members and validate their work, but also so that the members can get to know each other a little bit better, which will really help the conversations going forward. Where you're just coming into a room for an hour, 2 hours to discuss the issues and then leave again, the team aren't building a team bond, and you will need that to really push this forward and get things going, and to be able to have honest, difficult, frank conversations. You need to think that members bring their knowledge, expertise, experience, and commitment to the team. And you need to think about how to manage those different things. Why are you inviting someone to be there? It might be that they're representing their faculty, but do they know that they're there representing that faculty? It might be that they're coming because of their race expertise, in which case those expertise need to be acknowledged within the room, and people need to listen and be prepared to have difficult conversations and understand. You need your team to take responsibility for particular tasks and elements of the application. This can't be led by an equality and diversity team or an equality and diversity manager. It needs to be led by the team, and ultimately the chair of the self-assessment team needs to have overall oversight and responsibility for the work. The self-assessment team may or may not have responsibility for implementing the actions going forward. What we hear regularly from people renewing is that actions fall by the wayside after the application. There's a risk of losing momentum after being successful with an application. So think before you even set your team up how you can keep that momentum going. Who's going to be responsible for monitoring that action plan and keeping that action plan on task and to date, and ensuring those actions are implemented? And what are the best mechanisms you've got, or what do you need to implement to ensure that action plan is implemented? And finally, I've put at the bottom there, what skills do you need? And think about soft skills as well as knowledge skills. You need people that can communicate with each other. You need people that are going to say the uncomfortable truths. You need people that are going to listen and self-reflect. And it's a difficult team to manage. So just think about that in advance. Your chair needs to be senior at Pro Vice Chancellor level or above. Your chair may not have ever thought about race equality before, and they may be terrified of this. So you need to think about how you can upskill your chair to manage conversations about race and racism. They're going to really need to be able to self-reflect and to have awkward conversations, difficult conversations, and to manage those conversations without getting defensive or without trying to derail the conversation. It might be worth having two chairs, co-chairs. Co-chairs can bring different skills and different strengths and different knowledge bases. There's a whole variety of reasons you might want co-chairs. One option would also be to have one co-chair who works on staff issues. So it might be a senior member of your HR directorate, and then they could be co-chair with an academic who leads on teaching and learning, so that you ultimately, most universities are better at either staff or students, and that comes across in their application, and that's fine, but you need to make sure that you've got really good actions in place for the one that you're weaker in to compensate. And having co-chairs can be a good way of getting around that, because you end up with both sets of expertise and it doesn't end up skewed to the expertise of the chair. The chair also needs to understand the scale of the challenge in addressing racial inequalities. I think people can be lulled into a false sense of security, especially if you've seen a lot of success with Athena Swan, where they think that they understand it, they get it, you analyse a bit of data, you put some actions in place, you get your reward. Actually, this is really difficult. Race equality is very different from gender equality, and people need to understand that. They also need to understand the guiding principles and really understand them. They need to reflect on the fact that we're dealing with micro inequalities as well as overt racist incidences. They need to understand that different ethnic groups have different trajectories, and they need to understand that we do not want to take a deficit model approach with this work. So think about how you will support the chair in developing their understanding around all of that. Think also about the resources. Potentially this is going to be an 18 to 24 month process. Staff time for meetings and work in between. How many workload hours is this realistically going to be? And how will it be recognised in staff promotions? So will it be evidence for academics in terms of citizenship when they apply for promotion? And for professional services staff, how will it be recognised in their appraisals and reward systems as well? People that commit to the self-assessment team also need to be realistic in the work that's involved, and your senior management team need to make it okay for them to have that workload reflected, and for their line managers to give permission for them to take time out of their normal day job to do this. It shouldn't be just on top of what they already do. You need a dedicated budget. You need to think about training for your self-assessment team members. We highly, highly recommend, and may next year decide to mandate, that your self-assessment team will need race equality training right at the beginning. The first team meeting you have will probably be race equality training, thinking about how to talk about race equality, thinking about some of the challenges that exist that your team is trying to overcome. You need to get everyone on the same page, and you need to make everyone feel comfortable talking about race equality, which is a difficult thing to do. You might want to have an external facilitator for meetings, and you might want to think about a budget for implementing the actions and the action plan. Ultimately, you do need senior management buy-in. One thing to be clear with your senior management team before even embarking on this is that if you don't have that management buy-in, you're unlikely to get the award. The person chairing the self-assessment team and the person supporting the self-assessment team and the self-assessment team itself can be as brilliant as they can possibly be, and they can undertake a really good self-assessment. But if they don't have buy-in from managers, if they don't have human resources team committing to actions, if they don't have teaching and learning teams committing to actions, if they don't ultimately have that buy-in, you're not going to get the award. And it's unfair for that to then fall to the people that are involved in the self-assessment team to take the blame. So make that clear to senior managers before committing to applying for a Race Equality Charter Award. You need to ensure that you've got involvement from minority ethnic staff and students from the off before you even establish your self-assessment team. No one likes feeling like something's being done to them or that something's being done on their behalf without being involved in it. So think before you even contact people about the self-assessment team. Is there buy-in generally across the university for getting involved with REC? Do your staff and student networks, does your student union, does your African Caribbean Society, does your Black staff network, do they know about this? Have you asked them? And don't underestimate the power of just informal conversations and going and having a quick chat with people about this before embarking upon it. And be clear from the beginning about how staff and students can and will be involved. How can you get those with an interest and expertise in race equality involved? And you might not know who those people are. They might be out there doing fantastic research and you just don't know about them. So how can you do a call out to include people whilst managing expectations and also managing the size of the self-assessment team? How will you ensure minority ethnic staff and students are fully involved all the way through, trying to avoid a top-down approach, whether real or perceived? So when it comes to choosing members for the team, you want to achieve the right balance. You might want to have a look in the REC handbook at page 22 about this. You want the size of the team to be manageable so that you can ultimately get those people in the room together. You probably don't want many more people than about 20, 25 maximum. And you can, so things we've seen other universities do. One university did a call out for volunteers and they handpicked people that didn't fill the gaps they needed. So they used a combination. They had an overwhelming response from people volunteering to be on the team, and they ended up with too many people. So they chose some people for the team, and then they created an involvement and consultation group underneath their self-assessment team with the people that couldn't be on the team. So it meant that the self-assessment team could have their conversations and think about the issues and think about their actions, and then they could bounce ideas off of the consultation group. And having a member of the self-assessment team sit on that consultation group can be a good way of involving them and ensuring dialogue between the two groups. You are likely to need to handpick some people as well, because the people that volunteer for this are probably the people that are interested in it, but you might not necessarily have the people that represent all the areas that you need. And there's details in the REC handbook about who you need. Think about having a chaplain. A chaplain can be really useful in, they've got access to a different group of people and they'll hear things. They'll have a lot of anecdotal evidence from things they've heard from staff and students that might be of use to the self-assessment team. And they also have a bit more ability to be controversial and say the uncomfortable truths than other people might be able to be. You need to ensure that you've got ethnic diversity as well as people on there with race equality expertise that can challenge you and ensure you go down the right path. But you also need people like your heads of HR, your heads of teaching and learning, your heads of research that are able to agree to actions and implement change in their area. Another idea is that you've got your core team that might be your 20 or 25 people, and then you'll have a plan as to what you want to agree in each of your team meetings. And so you could have relevant teams coming along to those relevant meetings. For example, if you're having a meeting about student support, then you're going to need representatives from your student support team in that meeting. They might not necessarily be members of the self-assessment team, but they could come along for that meeting to help you discuss the issues and ultimately agree to actions. Because if it's them that are going to be responsible for implementing the actions, it's useful if they're there for the conversation to agree the actions. And just make sure people know which hat they're wearing on the team. Are they there as an academic, or are they there as a faculty representative, or are they there because they're responsible for X, Y, or Z? Just make sure they're clear about that. So we've covered this to some extent, but think about the structure of the team. So are you going to have a core team with subgroups? I think that can work really well. You can have your core team, and then you could potentially have a subgroup looking at staffing issues. You could have a subgroup looking at academic staffing issues. You could have a subgroup looking at professional services staffing issues. You could have a subgroup looking at teaching and learning. You could have whatever subgroup works for you. You could have a subgroup looking specifically at culture change. How can you develop a program of training and events that are going to start conversations strategically and systematically across the university over a sustained period of time? And as I've already said, you could have a core team with specialists invited to relevant and specific meetings. So they're not necessarily on the self-assessment team, but they come for specific meetings where you're going to be discussing things specific to their area of work. And obviously just think about who would lead those subgroups and how those subgroups are going to meet. Communication, involvement, and consultation can't be underestimated. It's so important. You need to make sure that staff and students are involved and also feel involved. So make sure you've got relevant networks and unions either represented on your self-assessment team or involved in some way. When you think about your surveys, think about how you're going to publicise them. We've seen some really good ideas from people. One university has decided to run their REC surveys in place of their normal staff and student surveys for a year. That way, they're hoping to maximise their response rate and overcome the potential for survey fatigue. Another university recruited student ambassadors to promote the survey. Their student ambassadors were trained and paid, and they went to lectures at the end of lectures to talk to their peers about filling in the survey. They went to their halls of residence and encouraged their peers to complete the survey. And you could potentially do something similar with staff as well. And you could upskill staff to talk to their students about completing the survey, but also ask staff to speak to their colleagues about completing the survey as well. Once you've got your survey results, and we would recommend doing your survey fairly early on in your self-assessment process, because ultimately you want to use the results of that survey to inform your self-assessment, think about focus groups and interviews. It's frustrating when you see in action plans, conduct a focus group to explore X, Y, or Z, because ultimately that should be part of your self-assessment. Give yourselves time in your self-assessment to run those focus groups and interviews. Make them targeted rather than just being about general race equality. Use the results of the survey and also anecdotal evidence that you've got from staff and students to think about really those areas that you want to explore further and understand better and to start building actions for. And keep people updated. Think about using social media. Think about your web pages, think about publishing meeting minutes, And think about providing staff and student updates. And if those updates can come from the chair or even the Vice-Chancellor, it's a really good way of publicising this work and ensuring people know what's going on. Team bonding and development. It sounds like something you're not going to have time to do, but is really important to the success of the self-assessment team. I said at the beginning that one university found team away days really helpful. If that's out of the question and you're just not going to have time, then think about maybe having a meeting that ends with a lunch, so people can just hang around and then have lunch together afterwards, or maybe starting with lunch or breakfast or what have you. Something where people can have a chat outside of the formality of the self-assessment team. And also think about development. So you might have race equality training in the first meeting of the self-assessment team, but how are you going to continue to upskill people? Some people have created recommended reading lists for their self-assessment team, which includes books such as Why I No Longer Talk to White People About Race, or they've recommended specific chapters from books, or they've sent around YouTube clips of various people talking about race and ethnicity, just to try and drip feed information to the self-assessment team and continuously try and get people more comfortable talking about race and having the right conversations about race equality. Please, if you've got good resources there, please share them on the JISC list, the race charter list at giscmail.ac.uk. There's already some good ideas on there that people have posted. Keep them coming, because it really helps to share with other people what you're doing and also to hear from others what they're using as well. And it might be that we'll eventually have a really good list of resources that people use. Peggy McIntosh is unpacking the white knapsacks, also a really good resource to start thinking about white privilege with your self-assessment team, and maybe even thinking about white privilege and race equality training for your senior management team as well. When you're thinking about your planning, some of these things are the things that we're seeing people be unsuccessful on the basis of. Race equality expertise is key. As well as having ethnic diversity on your self-assessment team, you need to ensure there are members on that team that really understand race equality and can lead your conversations in the right direction. The conversations you're having are going to be uncomfortable. Ultimately, you are looking at challenging structures and cultures within your university, and having people with race equality expertise on that team will help you do that. You think about your guiding principles in every meeting, maybe even have the guiding principles on the wall of every meeting. Ensure that you are thinking about the micro inequalities and the microaggressions that people of colour face within your university, and also ensure you're not taking a deficit approach, and just make sure you've got people there to challenge you if they think that you are inadvertently doing either of those things. You need to think about the qualitative lived experience. You need your statistics and you need your quantitative data to point you in the right direction, to help you identify trends and to prioritize those trends. But to really understand why they're occurring and what the lived experience is and how to overcome them and develop actions, you need the lived qualitative experience from your staff and students. So ensure you collect that as part of your self-assessment rather than as actions after your self-assessment. And be prepared for uncomfortable truths and to listen to the dissenting voice, and create a safe space for your minority ethnic staff and students to be able to air their views and their lived experience, and to be believed rather than challenged. Your action plan will be key. You need really solid proactive actions. We don't want actions that are ultimately part of your self-assessment. It might be that there are areas where you need to explore further or to investigate more or to understand more, but they should be the minority of actions. The majority of the actions should be proactive, and they should ensure that you are advancing race equality over the next 3 years. And make sure you've got a project plan. People underestimate the amount of work that goes into this, and you need to be clear at the beginning when your self-assessment team meetings are, what you're going to discuss, when you're going to run your survey, when you're going to run focus groups, and give yourself a good 9-12 months at the end to develop your action plan. Your action plan is going to take a good amount of time to develop, and that should be about half of your self-assessment. So you want half of your self-assessment looking at what the issues are and what's causing them, and you want half of your self-assessment developing the actions to tackle them. So thinking about a project plan, establish your team. So you want to consult with relevant networks, staff, students, recruit your chair. You want to send an invite to potential members from the chair. You want to ask volunteers, and you want to consider training and development for your self-assessment team. You might want to choose a submission date to aim for. You can always push it back if you don't make it, but it's good to keep momentum going by having a date in mind. But be realistic. If you haven't done much race work up to this point, you're looking at probably 18 to 24 months. Maybe give yourselves 2 years, and then if you've just become members, you've still got another year of contingency time to push things back. Generate your quantitative data immediately, and think about when you're going to conduct the survey, and think about the communications around the survey. How will you increase the response rate, and when's a good time to run it? Probably not at the beginning of the first year of at the beginning of October when people have just come back. Think about when during the academic year it is the best time to run the surveys. Once you've got your data, we're looking at analysis and reaction. What are the gaps, issues and trends? Where are the leaks in the pipeline? And then what are your subsequent aims and priorities in the long, medium and shorter term? We want to know how the university feels about these gaps that you're finding. What is your reaction to it? And use that reaction to develop your aims and priorities. And then ultimately, create your SMART action plan. Make sure your actions are proactive and will advance race equality. Consult on the action plan and don't rather make sure you leave yourselves enough time to develop your actions. Like I said, it's probably going to be half of your self-assessment is developing these actions, because ultimately they are what's going to drive race equality forward over the next 3 years. Consult on the action plan and consider evaluation, and have a think about whether the actions are going to achieve the aims identified above. You don't want just a scattergram approach to actions, or you don't want to put actions in place just because that's what everyone else is doing. You want your actions to achieve your aims and priorities. And ultimately, you want to get people talking about race equality confidently and competently across your university. That's the ultimate goal, and to be aware of what's happening and to start tackling racial inequalities. Stay in touch and communicate with the other REC members. You can contact the Race Equality Charter team using that email address there. Actually, it's AdvanceHE, racecharter@advanceh.ac.uk. Join our JISC list, which is racecharterlist@jiscmail.ac.uk, and send ideas to other REC members, hear from other REC members. And keep an eye on our website for workshops, events and resources. We also have our REC member networks now as well, which we're trying to run once a term. So look out for those. It's a really good opportunity to come together with other REC members and to troubleshoot and share ideas and learning, and to feel invigorated and inspired. And please just do keep in touch. If you've got any questions or ideas or issues, drop us an email or give us a call, and hopefully we can have a chat about it. And ultimately, good luck. The idea of this was to give ideas rather than to scare people off. Hopefully it has done that. Just think through your self-assessment team before putting the team together, and make sure you've got a solid project plan for making sure you keep on track and you know how you're going to get to the end point. Thank you.